Welcome to the Your Dairy Checkoff podcast, where we speak with Checkoff leadership nationally and locally, as well as dairy farmers, to discuss strategies that are driving sales and trust of U.S. dairy, as well as our dairy farmers who make it all happen. I'm Scott Wallin with Dairy Management Incorporated. Today, I am so excited to speak with you about a new strategy that addresses the first 1,000 days of life. This is such critical information for parents who are expecting or who have newborns at home. With me today to talk about the first 1,000 day strategy are two of my Checkoff colleagues, Megan Maisano and Eris Georgiadis. How are you guys both doing today?
Doing great.
Awesome. Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, I'm so excited to talk about this subject. And before we get into the questions, let's start with some introductions about what you do for the Dairy Checkoff. Megan, start with you.
Sure. So I'm a dietitian and I'm the Director of Nutrition and Regulatory Affairs at National Dairy Council, where, I support regulatory reviews, outreach, and education, and specifically help lead our first 1,000 days focus for maternal and early childhood health and nutrition.
Thanks, Megan. Eris, how about you?
I'm Senior Vice President for Marketing Communications. I oversee our consumer outreach primarily, and I work very closely with Megan and the rest of the NDC team to make sure that all that wonderful science gets translated into snappy, friendly consumer content.
And that is exactly why I love this strategy, because you are beginning with this amazing research and science that has applications for the health professionals, health and wellness communities. But yes, then your team is taking it, and there are so many ways that it applies to the consumer audience. Megan, before we jump into the questions, let's just start with when we hear about first 1,000 days, what exactly do we mean?
So, Scott, it's funny. Before we go into that, yesterday in preparation for this interview, I was doing the math, and I've technically been living in the first 1,000 days since the fall of 2019. I was pregnant with my first daughter and continued on to have my son, and now I'm pregnant again with twins on the way, actually. So that's nearly 5 years of living in this 1,000 day time frame, with another 2.5 to go. So I love this topic, and I'm so excited to talk with you all about it. So when I talk about the first 1,000 days, what do I mean? We're talking about this really special time that starts during pregnancy and ends at a child's second birthday. This period's really important because it's a phase of rapid growth and development, particularly for the brain. And that's why scientists emphasize that the first 1,000 days are a critical time for cognitive development and an opportunity to build a strong foundation for lifelong health, even into adulthood. And what research continues to show is that nutrition is so key here. Our diets during pregnancy, lactation, infancy, early toddlerhood, they fuel the brain during this sensitive time, and therefore can affect our ability to grow, learn, and thrive in a way that can have long-term effects on our health, academic achievement, even productivity in society. So, there's not only incentive from a health and pediatric perspective to invest in the first 1,000 days, but also, there's this economic and social motivation to support our next generation too.
You mentioned nutrition, obviously, and it's important. Dairy is right there front and center as a part of this strategy. What do we know from a research and science perspective about dairy's role in the first 1,000 days?
A well-rounded and diverse and nutritious diet is certainly important. There are specific nutrients that are uniquely beneficial to early brain development. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics highlights 14 nutrients in their policy statement for improving nutrition during this first 1,000 day time. And dairy foods provide 7 of those 14 nutrients, specifically protein, zinc, choline, selenium, iodine, vitamin B12, and vitamin A. Now, one I really want to highlight here is iodine. Many people don't know too much about this nutrient, but it's critical for thyroid health and early brain development. In fact, iodine deficiency is the most preventable cause of intellectual disability worldwide. Now iodine can only be found naturally in foods like dairy, seafood, and eggs. And research shows that milk and dairy foods are the largest food contributor to our iodine intake in the US. In fact, dairy alone provides a little more than 40% of the iodine consumption in US girls and women. So for pregnant people, parents, caregivers, dairy foods are a simple and a practical way to really hit half of these important nutrients for early brain development, especially during the first 1,000 days.
So, Eris, we mentioned there's this amazing play now, for the consumer audience. You've got this really outstanding science and research. Can you first of all talk about there's a coordination and process that occurs between your team and National Dairy Council. Walk us through what that looks like.
A lot of it just starts with curiosity, right? So when we hear about the work that the science team is doing, right, and we hear about the research, it often starts with what's new. Like, what do we not know? Like, what's important? And speaking for myself and for the rest of the marketing team, when we started hearing about iodine, right, and, you think about iodine as something in salt. And then when we find out it's in dairy and why it's important, it's like, okay, that's novel. That's not something that I think has been communicated. How do we tell that story? And then from there, I think it becomes a process of understanding, of asking questions, of getting the teams together. I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of the Checkoff, right, is it brings all these people together under the same roof to be able to have these really important conversations and then get to the heart of what here is important. How do we tell that? How do we then shape it in a way where it becomes easy to understand? So you're not overwhelming anybody trying to understand, like, okay, well, what do I need to eat when I'm pregnant, right? It gets very fraught with a lot of emotion. So how do we simplify it and how do we tell that in a really exciting way?
And your strategy stretches so far beyond just us. I mean, yeah, it's Dairy Management Inc., it's National Dairy Council, but it's also our state and regional federation. It's all the dairy companies, U.S. Dairy Export Council, Nutrient, and then Milk Pep also is involved with this. Can you talk about this surround sound effort that's occurring?
I think one of the things that has to happen at the very beginning, like to even get to the surround sound, you have to cascade this information out, right? So it's one thing when we sit down internally and get to talk to Megan and her team and get to talk to others on the NDC side, on the research side. It's a whole other thing now when you're trying to tell a federation, right? Trying to tell our partners. And so I think a lot of that work, it begins with, do we do the webinars, right? How do we explain this? How do we share this information out? What even is the information that needs to go out there, right? So it often starts with, how do we create content that is accessible to everybody? Where do we put that content, right? Be it PDFs, fact sheets, resources, articles on usdairy.com, right? So we have to build all this foundation of information first that everybody can see and understand. We find the webinars to be critically important avenues of communicating, right? We bring everybody on board, including some of our agency partners, because they have to work with us in getting this information out there. So I think the first step in terms of like how we share that and how we tell that story is just getting everybody on board, right? Getting everybody on the same page. I think that's number one. And I think when we talk about how, when we think about surround sound, we think about what's the value that everybody can bring to the table, right? So when you mentioned Milk Pep, for example, right? Milk Pep could really deliver that fluid milk story, right? And talk about how, fluid milk and iodine and what that relationship is. When we talk about the SRs, we think about who they have on staff, nutritionists and dietitians, who could then also shape that story for their audiences and for their local markets. They often have, retail partners that they could also coordinate with. So hitting as many touch points as possible is really important because it's not just one voice that could share this information. It really needs to come from everybody to reinforce what an important advancement this is for us to discuss.
I love that concept of you putting a lot of drops in the bucket collectively, and I think it's incredible. Some things have obviously launched by now that are in market. Can you just walk us through a couple of examples of what specifically we've done with this strategy?
Oh, sure. And this has been really exciting because I think it's been the genesis for a lot of great work, actually going back to 2023. When we first started working on this and hearing about it, we worked with our agency partners to secure us some really good media opportunities, right? So we partnered at the outset with Healthline and Baby Center to kind of first introduce this idea for first 1,000 days, right? And to start talking about iodine and some of the other nutrients that are found in our products. And then from there, we started seeing what kind of reaction we were getting, right? The early results were so strong, we thought this is something we really need to continue to build on. So this year, for example, we increased our media partnerships to include really top level, large consumer facing outlets like Hearst Magazine, Hearst Publications, rather, which includes Good Housekeeping, which is an important publication reaching parents. We have USA Today, for example, is another partner. And both of those outlets are telling our first 1,000-day story. We're also working with teams to coordinate with Mayo Clinic and its website properties, where we have a parenting hub that also goes into not just first 1,000 days, but everything you need to know about nutrition for your family. In addition to that, we have our influencers, our Dairy Dream Team. On the Dairy Dream Team, we have some parents who have a really strong following and a strong audience, and they tell such great stories and create such fantastic content in their words, right? They're very relevant, but they speak in such a way that's engaging and really bring the, really reinforce like why nutrition is important, but they do it with their kids on camera, which is great. So you get to see them creating all this food and sharing all this food with their children. And then we have just our ongoing social, our always on strategy. It's really important to hit, I want to call them consumers, but they're not. They're parents, they're moms, they're dads, they're pregnant people who we know this is a really stressful time for them, right? You're bombarded with information. So how do you put out really fun content that kind of gives them a little bit of a laugh, maybe makes them smile, but also reinforces the importance of our foods, right? So it's a way to connect like, I'm really stressed, but hey, I could enjoy this yogurt bowl or this smoothie, or here's a great recipe that I just saw, and I can't wait to try it. So I think having as much of this content out there in market across all of our channels is super important.
The social media aspect of that is just so critical because we know so many consumers, especially in that Gen Z audience, that's where they're going for their information. They're looking at those influencers that we are working with. So that is just such a critical and important part of this. Megan, I want to come back to you and ask you a similar question. How are you taking this information now and reaching the health and wellness communities?
You know, this topic of the first 1,000 days has really been a pillar of our team's work at National Dairy Council over the last few years, as well as the state and regional councils too. We've really invested time in first diving into the research and the literature to even ourselves better understand its importance and the role of dairy nutrition. And then with that, we connected with researchers and thought leaders in the field. We're educating a wide variety of audiences, from dietitians to nurses to pediatricians via, like Era said, our webinar series, conferences, speaking engagements, but also more consumer-facing channels with satellite media tours, news station interviews, and even a very cool TED Talk from our president, Dr. Katie Brown. And lastly, as Eris mentioned, we've launched this topic throughout social media. So we've been supporting Eris's work on his channels, as well as National Dairy Council's social media. And we have a new Instagram, so please check it out. And as far as how they're reacting, from my experience, I think there are three messages that are really resonating with most of these folks. And first, it's the time sensitivity of the first 1,000 days and how powerful that short window of opportunity is for long-term benefits. Next, it's iodine. Its important role in early brain development and how dairy foods are, quite frankly, just an easy and reliable source of it. A lot of people don't know this. And lastly, it's how dairy foods provide 7 of the 14 nutrients. So half of those nutrients that are really important for early brain development. For us, it just really brings home the message we're trying to hit, that dairy truly nourishes our kids' brains, bones, and bodies.
National Dairy Council, been around over a century, and we built so many relationships over those years. So it's great to see the buy-in in so many of these respected organizations that understand the value of dairy. And yet here comes another benefit for them to tout, to all their audiences. Eris, if people, specifically our dairy farmers, wanted to see some of this content, do you have some places where we can direct them?
So I would start with usdairy.com. We have 2 really great foundational stories, very much following what Megan was saying. One is just that foundational piece to explain what the first 1,000 days are, right? Because just to give it some context. And then we have a second story that goes deeper into iodine and other nutrients as well. So I think you start with that. Really gives farmers, I think, the full story. And those stories also link to all the resources we have that NDC has created that's in our resource center. So fact sheets, recordings of the webinars. So that's a great start. go talk to your grandkids or your kids, get on TikTok, go follow UD's channels. We rotate our first 1,000 days content throughout UD's social channels. So that would be Pinterest, it would be TikTok, it would be Facebook, and it would be Instagram. So we create videos, both informational, but also what we call edutainment, right? So education with a little bit of entertainment there, because again, this is an overwhelming time, right? If you think about when you're on the internet and you Google, pair of pants, for example, next thing you know, that pair of pants is following you all over the place, right? It's the same thing. If you start Googling, like, what do I feed my kids? You're going to be overwhelmed with all sorts of, links and banners. So we try to give you that moment of pause where as you're scrolling late at night because you're worried about something, one of our videos hopefully will give you a moment to calm down and say, oh, hey, I should go have some dairy.
That's amazing. I guess I need to check and see if pants are following me around on social media.
Yeah, I don't want to know about your search history.
Absolutely. The beauty of this is that we're far from done. There's so much more to do. We're sort of at the beginning of this. Megan, can you talk a little bit about maybe some next steps that National Dairy Council is going to lead with this strategy?
Yeah, I think we really want to keep the strong momentum going. Our team's continuing to find opportunities just to raise awareness. We're working with thought leaders and social media influencers to more help just spread the word on dairy's role during pregnancy and early childhood, to reach more and to teach more. And one example of this actually is our ambassador program at National Dairy Council. This is a team of renowned health and wellness professionals who are just champions of dairy nutrition and work with us to help educate their networks. They have been so excited about this topic and have also begun incorporating it in their messaging and education, and when they get asked to speak at conferences, things like that. And lastly, of course, collaboration with experts on Eris's team to find, as he said, that kind of magical intersection of science and communication. This strategy isn't going away anytime soon.
Eris, same question for you. What's next?
Oh, I think we're just going to keep up the momentum. We're waiting for the results of some of the work that's currently in market. We anticipate it's going to be great. Our partners have been excellent. They've created some really fantastic pieces of work for us, and we're going to continue this momentum into 2025. I think one of the main things when we think about digital, right, when we think about social, is we get to see data, we get to see results, and we get to find out, like, where could we do better, right? How could we reach more people? What are the type of stories they want to hear? What are the type of videos they want to watch? So it's not just, hey, we did this, the numbers are great. It's how do we take that learning and bring it into the next year and keep improving and keep telling that story even better? Because if you don't use the data for that, then what are you using it for?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's exciting to know there's just so much life left on this strategy. And I think that's what makes it so effective. There's still so much more to do. So we're all excited to see what's next. I want to finish with a question for both to be on. Megan, I'm going to start with you. If you were standing before a group of dairy farmers and you wanted them to know one thing about this strategy, what's the one takeaway you wish they would take from knowing what we're doing here?
So I might be biased. I'm a mom, I'm a dietitian, and I'm pregnant. But I really do think this topic of the first 1,000 days, along with just maternal health in general, is really gaining traction, not only in our strategy here, but among researchers, health and wellness professionals, public health initiatives, and just general consumer audience. And the exciting news is that dairy nutrition plays a really valuable role in that story. So I would end with, thank you. The work you farmers do every day is not only nourishing our country today, but it's really investing in a healthier next generation.
Obviously, I'm biased as well about our National Dairy Council team. We have such an amazing group of talented people that are carrying this forward in the many ways they are reaching the health and wellness and health professionals community. So I know they're going to keep on pushing this down the road, and there's going to be more great things to come. Eris, same question for you. If you were standing before a group of dairy farmers, what's the one takeaway you wish they knew about this?
I would not be able to tell this story without the science to back it up, right? The credibility that we have because of all that fantastic research makes our storytelling that much easier. And it's amazing to be able to communicate something that we could all stand behind and feel really passionate about because of the efforts farmers do in funding all this amazing science and research and to be able to fund teams like Megan's team. I think that's great. And it makes everything we say just that much stronger. And I think the second thing I would just love to tell farmers is, hey, we recognize that marketing is different today. It's different than it was 20 years ago, where you could just turn on the TV and watch an ad, right? To reach consumers today, especially parents, it is hard. It is fragmented out there. And I appreciate their patience and support as, we're navigating a really difficult media landscape to get this message out there. And that just means a lot to me to know that we have their support.
Yeah, and we're absolutely front and center in that new way of reaching people through different marketing strategies. It's so much more today than just watching an ad on television. It is working with these influencers, and I love what you said. And really, the idea that consumers still care about research and science, it still matters to them, and certainly National Dairy Council can absolutely stand on many pillars in that regard. Well, those are all my questions, Eris and Megan. I cannot thank you enough. I really enjoyed the conversation. Again, I'm so excited about this strategy, and we're looking for more great things down the road. Thank you again for your time.
Great,
Thank you, Scott. Yep.
Dairy farmers, be sure to follow this podcast on your favorite platforms, including Spotify, Stitcher, and iTunes. Also, be sure to check out our new website, dairycheckoff.com, to find more ways that we are driving sales and trust on your behalf. Until next time, have a dairy great day.